we actually acquired a small backup provider. I don't know, 50, 60, 70 customers, evolved that from a backup platform to a disaster recovery platform and grew it to 700 or so customers around the country, much bigger customers than the ones we started with. Actually sold that first customer base off somewhere along in the journey and drilled down and focused on the DRaaS business and enjoyed a really great run with that. Grew it nicely, as you say, successfully exited.
Will Baccich with Seton Hill Partners, really excited to have you here sharing your expertise, both as an entrepreneur with a successful exit and now as a fractional CFO who's helping lots of different businesses. Really excited for this conversation.
It's great to be here. Have enjoyed following your path as well from, starting this business that you've now grown so well. It just seems like it happened in a few days, but I think it was a little longer than that, right?
It was a little longer than that, but yeah. One of the ways I became a Will fan for everybody tuning in is you were very early to the game of figuring out how to create relationships that raised everybody up. Let's talk about what we're doing together. Let's network. And we both met through a group that we belong to with some other folks of similar mindset. Maybe a great place to start is tell us a little bit about that history.
I started Global Data Vault with a partner, an investor partner in the UK. In 2006, we actually acquired a small backup provider that was located in Durango, Colorado, and they had, a few, 50, 60, 70 customers. It wasn't a big acquisition, nothing terribly fancy, but it gave us a little platform to build onto, and we evolved that from a backup platform to a DRaaS, disaster recovery platform, and grew it to 700 or so customers around the country, much bigger customers than the ones we started with. Actually sold that first customer base off somewhere along in the journey and drilled down and focused on the DRaaS business and enjoyed a really great run with that. Grew it nicely, as you say, successfully exited. Were acquired by a private equity firm, and I worked for those guys for a little over a year and enjoyed that. It was very interesting and educational time. That's kind of the story in a nutshell. We should talk about the networking and relationships along the way. Having leveraged our group here in Dallas, I started a similar group in Southern California. Mm-hmm. We had a good base of business out in Southern California to start with, and following the same sort of model of give to get and abundance mentality. That group has really flourished as well. Probably grew the business somewhere around 20 times where it was when we acquired it. That took quite a few years, and we hit the ceiling several times. And had to work to break through that. And each time it's a different thing. For me, I don't know that this is the answer for every entrepreneur, but for me, the answer was, and we were not EOS driven, but we did a lot of EOS like things. I mean, we had a scorecard, we had accountability, we had milestones, we had rocks, those kinds of things. We didn't call them that because I didn't really become an EOS fan until much more recently. But the formula we used sort of to break through the ceiling was, at the beginning of each year, we would list 10 things we're going to do, knowing that we'd really only execute on 7 and expecting or hoping that at least 2 or 3 or 4 would work. And that worked for us. What's that old saying about marketing? Half the money you spend on marketing is wasted. You just never know which half.
I don't know that I've heard that one, but it resonates.
Yeah, it's real.
Yes, indeed.
Try to get, as a CFO now, I'm very friendly to the marketing budget, and I have run into in my, experience, money people who are like, well, tell me what's going to be the ROI on that. And I'm like, oh, sheesh, come on, shut up. They're like, we have no idea. Okay.
Yeah. Well, it's an experiment, right?
We're going to try some stuff. Yeah, certainly in deference to those people, if it's a more mature market and we're adding customers to an existing offering and there's known pathways, yeah, you can measure your customer acquisition costs and you can, look at how your customer lifetime value, how's that going to affect your ROI? Yeah, that's fine. All right. In an entrepreneurial environment, that might be overkill. I don't know if this is a good segue to talking about KPIs and such, but
I think
somehow I got there.
There's I don't know if category is the right word, but I gravitate towards CFOs that have very strong entrepreneurial experience, because there's this idea of your CFO as an accountant, which isn't what a CFO does.
Right.
Or a CFO as a controller, and that's not what a CFO does. It's being able to allocate your resources and steward those resources in a way that can be very difficult at times, but get you where you need to go by making some of those tough calls, figuring it out, and understanding what goes into building a business, whether you're going from 1 to 10 million or whether you're going from 10 to 50 or even 50 up. A lot of these principles are still in there. Do you think with the different, now that you're working with larger businesses, where do things change? Where are you finding, okay, well, if you're below 10, here's how we run it? Are you finding that there's kind of a difference as you're running if a company is trying to get to 50 or 100 or some other much larger milestone?
Yes and no. I think the similarities are the CFO is, in a smaller business, the CFO is the go-to guy for the hard question. Let's make up an example. XYZ customer has said, I'm completely unhappy with what you're doing for me. I never should have bought your services in the first place. You guys are a bunch of goofballs, and I don't care what my contract says. I'm out of here, and I'm not sending you another nickel. And so the question, that comes to the CFO's desk. What should we do here? And there's a wide variety of options, Did we really goof up? Should we say, you know what? You're right. Please accept our apologies. Maybe even here's a credit for you or a refund. Or in between. No, we did our job. You still have to live up to your responsibility in this relationship, and we'd like to see you pay some or most or some portion of the rest of your contract, or you're flat out delirious, and we're going to refer this to legal counsel if you don't send us the rest of the money. How to approach that? What's the right answer in that scenario? And I don't think that kind of thing changes from a small company to a big company, except that in a big company, there'll be more people with more opinions about what the right answer is.
What are some examples of KPIs you like to look at, and do they change at those different sizes of those companies?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there is no one size fits all list of the right KPIs in my view. Mm-hmm. And to maybe provoke some argument from listeners, there are many ways to measure some of these KPIs. That there is no one perfect measurement of most of these things.
Mhm.
Now, I've made a list of what I think are the dozen most important KPIs. I wouldn't try to measure every one of those things in a given organization, in a given business. And these are focused around MSPs and SaaS businesses and software companies. But I believe that the first two things are actually non-financial metrics. The most important two things. Number one is customer satisfaction.
Mm.
Probably net promoter score. If you're not making people happy, if you're not pleasing people, if you're not delivering a good solution, you don't have a business. Number two, quality of service. That can be measured so many different ways from one business to the next. It might be, in traditional service providers, it might be things like response times or times to resolution. I really like SLA-based measurements such as, uptime, availability. Those are a little bit harder to measure. Depends on the quality and depth of the operating tools that you have to get the feedback to measure those sorts of things. But I love, if your customers are happy and you're delivering what you also believe is quality service and you can back that up with data, you're really on a good track. After that, the next most important thing is turning a profit. Now I'm a big fan of Warren Buffett. I've bought a few shares of Berkshire Hathaway.
As have I.
I've even attended his annual meeting in Omaha, just to sit for a whole day and listen to him talk. But I don't quite see eye to eye with Warren Buffett on the subject of EBITDA.
EBITDA, yeah, I was going to say he's not a fan.
No, he is not. In fact, he and Charlie have said some terribly nasty things about EBITDA.
Yeah, I've seen those.
But but I get it. Their framework, their investments are large publicly held companies, Chevron, Apple, Occidental Petroleum, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Our investments are closely held businesses where things like debt, okay. Chevron or Apple is as a business is never going to trade or change hands. The ownership is never going to change hands, or some part of ownership is never going to change hands without the debt moving with the value. But in an entrepreneurial business, the business most likely will change hands without the debt moving with the business.
Mm.
Right?
Okay.
If you're going to be acquired by a PE firm, they're like, well, sure, we want your business, but they're either going to leave you with a debt or pay off the debt and take that out of their valuation of the business, because the value of the business really derives is much more easily calculated based on what are the earnings without the debt. Even in a discounted, if you go back to pure MBA, straight to the textbook, discounted cash flow is what a business is worth. And I don't think Warren Buffett argues with that. He's got his intrinsic value formula that leans heavily on discounted cash flow. It's a little bit different and a little bit inscrutable to me, but I'm not going to argue with that. But discounted cash flow, essentially, you can pretty closely start with EBITDA in your discounted cash flow model, and you won't be way off. Unless there's other wild swings in the cash flow model. But EBITDA is a terrific indicator, predictor, measurement, forward, backward looking, indicator of the value of the business, as well as current and future cash flows, I think.
That's a really helpful explanation. It's one of those metrics I've always just accepted. Like, this is how people do business. And therefore I've accepted it. But when you explain it that way, it really helps it make sense. And, it also explains why Buffett and Munger aren't using it.
Yeah.
But they're investing very differently.
I started my career in public accounting, probably before you were born, in the 1980s.
Mm,
I
I'm a
don't.
little older than that, but thank you.
um, and we came at it from that traditional mindset that the business is built on after tax profits, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fully diluted earnings per share, those ultimate measures that uh, investors look at in when they look at mega caps or even large caps or even any kind of publicly held shares, any kind of good sized publicly held shares. Those are the earnings metrics that matter. And I was of that mindset when EBITDA kind of got its rise, I think, sometime around the early stages of my business career. And at first I was like, oh yeah, really? That's just some softies, trying to put lipstick on a pig somehow. If your debt, and your debt service is eating up your earnings and your cash, you still don't have a business. But I think that's changed as investment, the ability to get investment money into businesses has enabled some of these businesses that might not have been able to fund their debt. I mean, back in the day, it was largely bank finance if you got any finance at all.
Mm-hmm.
And today there's other sources, VC money primarily, but the whole angel investor thing didn't exist. Today there's that whole ecosystem. I mean, if you've got, I'm talking with some guys that have built a uniquely secure type of storage hardware, and it's an interesting business, and they need more capital, and they're small, and I think the next step for them is to visit with angel investors, and there's a whole universe of these guys. I've met a really interesting group in Northern California that has a online investment forum every month, and brings in 20 or so investors and 5 or 10 entrepreneurs to make their pitch. And it's just fascinating to go attend one of those meetings and watch and see how diverse these companies are. And he does a good job of measuring the operational maturity of each of them, so that they can be matched up with investors that want to invest at a given stage of the development of a company, or like a particular strength, or feel, or see areas where, as an investor, they can add value that might be needed and welcomed in some of these businesses. So the world is a little bit different today.
Is it fair to say with EBITDA that particular measure is of special interest when you are thinking about building a business up for some kind of acquisition or sale?
Yeah, I mean, I think almost every business needs to be focused on being able to be acquired. Right. I mean, there are it's not, you point to the numbers in terms of how many get to what size and whatnot. And those are challenging numbers. The other number that's challenging is literally the only other, transition, which is how many businesses are actually passed down to heirs or employees.
Mm-hmm.
Right. That transition is maybe even more rare, maybe even more difficult. So, my advice and strong encouragement to companies that I work with is you should always be an investable company. And if you're a startup, you really should work toward being an investable company, because it gives you the option to have an exit if you want, to hand to, transition ownership to the team through an ESOP or however, other mechanisms you can use to do that. Pass it on to the next generation of your family if they're involved in the business, and whatnot, so much more effectively if you are investable and you're earning money. So
I've heard that a lot too. Like, I mean, we just did an interview with the authors of the Pumpkin Plan for Managed Service Providers, and they talked about, get really at the beginning, thinking about even for whether if your business is small, think about what you want that end game to be, what you want the impact to be. I've heard this again and again when I'm speaking with folks who value companies, is the companies that are built that way, even if the founder's goal or the current owner or CEO's goal isn't to sell, you're going to be managed so much better, and you're going to be able to have much better mental health around what you're doing because your fundamentals are stronger versus that sort of hair on fire to try to either keep things growing or keep things running, which I talk to so many CEOs who fall into.
And then there's the other side too. It's the very successful business that becomes a lifestyle business.
Mm-hmm.
Are you paying for your vacations and your vacation homes and your I don't know, your whatever other personal expenses out of the business that you're mixing business and personal. That too is not a particularly clean situation and not necessarily healthy for the business. It always has to be untangled if there's ever going to be a transaction. I recently heard the story of the journey of Munster Mills. It was a 4-generation family business. The great grandfather had started it as a cattle feed and seed sort of business outside of Fort Worth here, and it had passed down and evolved and eventually became a dog food business where they made roasted, healthy dog food. And the 4th generation, 2 brothers, bought it, and it was the epitome of untangling business and personal, because when they bought it from mom and dad resigned and mom continued to work for the business, but mom wouldn't play by the new rules, and they had to fire mom twice.
Yeah.
The first time they fired her, she was like, "Yeah, right, sure, can't do that."
That actually resonates for me now that I hear that story a little more than I'd like it to. I mean, my father bought his father's business, and bought out shares from his siblings, and untangling that business, like he related to me later. He did not realize what he was buying, like, but he got it turned around, sold it, ended up buying it back later, sold it again. But that process it's very painful for those involved.
Oh God, I can't imagine having to fire your mom twice, right? But they'd paid mom and dad something on the order of $10 million, and then they turned around and sold it for about double that about 5 years later, with the backing of a strong investment bank, and it's a win-win for the whole family, even if there were some hard times.
Talking about these ideas of having just simple, strong fundamentals. You can call them strong, but the reality is keeping things as simple as possible strengthens them. And then once you have that in place, you talked about the decisions you have to make as a CFO in the role of informing decisions on how to deploy that capital. And I know you've got some ideas on how do you best deploy capital? What are the things businesses need to be thinking about to use that capital well?
I think it's fascinating that, when you talk to some entrepreneurs about the idea of capital deployment, they're like, well, no, that's for, mega caps and big companies that have all of this cash sitting around. But every business has got a choice, of where they're going to put their cash to work. Assuming that they're profitable. And if they're not profitable, you still have to figure out how you're funding it and where you're going to put it to work. how much are we going to invest in business development, in growth, in marketing, and what things are we going to place our bets on? And then over on the operational side, you're almost always going to have make versus buy type of decisions. We're spending, X on cloud hosting with AWS, for example. Should we build the capital infrastructure ourselves, convert that OpEx to CapEx, throw a whole lot more money to EBITDA? Where's the break even point in terms of the effort, versus the profitability, opportunity in that capital deployment, question? And, even pricing decisions, I think people can look at margins in a lot of different ways. I've personally been fascinated with one particular aspect of cost accounting, called absorption costing. And, absorption costing came into life, via Henry Ford in the, 20s. And the idea was that, well, every car that he made had a labor cost component. So he made sure that his pricing considered the labor cost component. And that actually worked pretty well for Ford, because if he didn't have cars to make, if demand was slack and it was Wednesday afternoon and he didn't need to fire up the line on Thursday morning, he just told the guys, there'll be no work tomorrow. And people didn't show up and no labor costs were incurred. Well, in today's world, that doesn't happen. The same group of guys need to get paid, guys and ladies. The same group of folks need to get paid every twice a month or whatever. If work is slow, it's not going to change our labor costs. So a lot of times we should consider, a lot of folks love to bring labor costs into the pricing decision, into gross profit models and so forth. Unless we are adding or decreasing labor at a meaningful changing clip within a year, I don't see any reason to consider labor anything other than a fixed cost. How do you look at that? Well, why is that important to me? If we have an opportunity to win a particular piece of business and we measure the profitability and consider the labor that's involved, if we have spare capacity, if our team isn't as, fully busy, if that project or job is not going to require us to hire, as long as the price is above the other fixed costs, the material costs or the incremental fixed costs, incremental fixed costs. I shouldn't say that. That's a oxymoron, right? The truly variable costs, if it's a service business, if it's a hosting business, the additional storage and CPU resource that we're gonna incur, if we're using a service provider, if we're capitalizing the asset, there's none, right? Likely if there's capacity. So, I think you have to think through carefully. How do you consider labor as a variable cost or a fixed cost, and how does it impact pricing?
Super interesting. I know as execution goes, as you're making those decisions, one of the things we chatted about a little bit ahead of time was you've become a big believer that, every business needs some kind of management framework, accountability, and those things. How do those fit in? What's the role? Is that something you think is critical for every business?
Yeah. Isn't it fascinating that to me at least, that, management, the evolution of the idea of management in a business has changed so much, during my career. The things that were written about management, in the 80s and 90s, I like to, look at, Larry Bossidy's book called Execution.
Hmm.
It's appropriately titled because he talks so often in the book about firing people. Jack Welch.
It's a different sense of execution than we like to talk
Yeah.
about at Result Maps.
Jack,
but yeah.
Jack Welch, same school. We're
Uh-huh.
gonna rank everybody, and we're gonna fire the bottom 10%. And he said it with such glee that you were like, "Whew, man."
The top grading thing, yeah.
Yeah. And today we have. I'll speak to the model that I'm most familiar with, EOS, right?
Mhm.
We also hear it in Jim Collins and other allied schools of thought. The idea of right people in the right seats. That's I think I probably first read that in Jim Collins stuff.
Yeah, that's a Jim Collins thing. Get the right people on the bus.
Yeah, but it's big in EOS too, traction is to me a earthquake book, not in just its insights, but in its simplicity. Truly is simplicity on the other side of complexity.
Mm.
And I love that. I think it's a great framework for business. Obviously it's gained a big foothold in entrepreneurial worlds. I mean, I'd be interested to see of the larger PE firms, what percent of them are dogmatic about EOS. I bet it's meaningful.
With that, you also mentioned, this idea we talked about early on. Every business needs a marketing strategy, some kind of unique value proposition, and I'd love to hear more about that and what KPIs you found are helpful, if any.
Yeah, I mean, the measurement of the effectiveness of your marketing strategy is how's your pipeline and what are you closing, right? In SaaS and MSP, I like to measure new MRR. What new MRR, new ARR have we added, and how much of that is in the pipeline? I think today maybe the fundamental thought that still is important is, blue ocean strategy. I think it's an idea that's really resonated with a lot of people. And to me, a blue ocean strategy, well, if I'm going to be, an MSP, let's just use this as an example of down the middle, regular, we're going to keep your IT working. We're going to keep it working well. That's probably the most common form of MSP out there. We're serving mid-market companies, and it doesn't really matter what business the company's in. We're just your technology outsource provider. Keep it working well. Help you take that burden out of your operations and management bailiwick. I think what is your differentiator? Because there are thousands of these guys around the country. You can choose to be in a vertical. What is it about you that makes you different? Is it your service delivery model? Is it your the quality that you bring? Is it some other special secret sauce? I personally, in working with SaaS companies and MSPs, sort of have a blue ocean strategy for my own work. And that is, we're not just here to help improve the financials, improve the financial reporting, make better financial decisions, all the things that you think of typically, a CFO provides, but we're also highly engaged with the investment banking community and with the private equity community. And seek to make opportunities for our clients to have those conversations, whether or not they're interested in a transaction, in an exit, or even just in a growth investment. We bring those relationships and opportunities to our clients, and it also helps them just keep that built to sell, so to speak, to borrow a quote, mindset in their strategy, in their planning, and in their vision of what they're doing with their company.
Do you see out there things that hold CEOs back in making these changes? Like what are the types of things that hold them back?
Fear, greed, human emotion, right? I mean, that's a whole nother podcast topic, isn't it?
Yeah, it certainly could be. I think that's something I hear a lot, that one way or another, it's us as the leader that, if you want to make changes, start with a mirror and understand what you're doing to create the situation.
Yeah. I certainly look back on my own career and think of moments where I've evolved beyond. And so everybody, I mean, when I say fear and greed hold us back, or
they're kind of related, it seems like, right? We get worried that if we start to open up these different ways, if we, whether it's as leaders, if it's trusting our team, or, having kind of a rising tide raises all ships mentality with people we might want to think of as competitors, will we lose? We fear that we'll lose that long-term gain. And the reality is it's really sort of the other way around.
Yeah, it is the ultimate conundrum, isn't it? Those are the things that entrepreneurs wrestle with and have so much opportunity. I'll tell you, as working as a fractional CFO, I feel like I can contribute in those moments of fear and greed with a far more reasoned, calm view of things, because my butt's not on the line nearly as badly as I've spent most of my career having my butt on the line. I talked with a guy yesterday who I work closely with and I like and respect a lot, and he had someone leave his organization and they were struggling about how to end things, and they had very, very divergent perspectives on a proper ending. And I just said, I completely agree with you. Your points are all completely right. You're totally right. But relax just a little bit. Find some peace with this guy. Don't torch the bridge completely. And I get it. In that moment, he's like, what he's asking for is completely unreasonable. Yeah, probably. Find a middle ground there. That's one to find a middle ground on.
I've been surprised at how often those different types of problems, if I will step back and create a little more clarity, and sometimes a lot more clarity, and really do my part to make sure I'm communicating and conveying the right level of clarity to others, things have a surprising way of working out differently than you think they might when your emotions or your fears are creeping in. And some of the best relationships I've had, some of our best contributors have been people that, the baby Scott probably would have huffed and puffed and been like, hey, this is done. And grown up Scott's like, what have I done here? How can I take ownership of the situation? And how can I be clear in what I need? And also make sure that person, is feeling supported enough that they can be successful. And obviously sometimes you have misaligned core values, or it's not the right situation.
Sure.
It's just been interesting how much as we get clearer on those elements of the business, our vision, our values, what we're trying to do and how we communicate and collaborate, how many more of those relationships and have turned into something very, very positive.
Yeah, that is a really great point, right? What's my part in this? I think is what you're saying. And that's obviously
Yes.
a great place to go. Another aspect of it is maintaining a high principle vision. Like, right. The idea is somehow this is going to work out well for all of us. We're in the ditch.
Yeah.
In our relationship, but somehow we're coming out together.